There's a hidden, silent force that shapes history, relationships, politics, and even the way we talk to ourselves. And no one wants to admit how powerful it is. It's not hatred. It's not greed. It's not even fear. It's ignorance. And I don't mean ignorance in the casual, dismissive way we use it online to insult someone we disagree with. I mean the deep, philosophical kind of ignorance. The kind Socrates risked his life to confront. The kind that hides behind confidence, moral certainty, and loud opinions. And the reason this kind of ignorance is so dangerous is precisely because it doesn't know it's ignorant. It speaks with absolute conviction. It walks with pride. It leads nations, raises children, controls institutions. And most disturbingly, it lives inside all of us. You, me, everyone. Socrates called it a kind of spiritual blindness, the illusion of knowledge. The belief that we know what we do not know. And in that illusion, we make decisions, impose beliefs, judge others, and shape the world around us, often with catastrophic consequences. That's what makes ignorance so terrifying. Not that it's passive, but that it's active, energized by certainty and immune to correction. And here's the brutal truth Socrates forced Athens to confront. The most dangerous people are not the evil ones, they're the people who are absolutely convinced they are good. Because once someone believes they are unquestionably right, they will justify almost anything in the name of that righteousness. Wars, censorship, persecution, betrayal, cruelty, it's all been carried out by people who thought they were defending truth, justice, or God. Socrates didn't fear ignorance as a lack of information. He feared it as an unshakable identity. And that's what we're seeing now every day, online and offline. People whose opinions have become who they are. People who defend their worldview not because it's true, but because it's theirs. And if you dare to question it, you're not just wrong, you're dangerous. You're the enemy. And that's how ignorance becomes a weapon. It doesn't just reject knowledge, it actively attacks it, because knowledge threatens its identity.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. This isn't just about other people. It's about us. The most painful thing Socrates ever taught wasn't about society, it was about the self. He said the path to wisdom begins with one terrifying realization: I know that I know nothing. Not as a humble-sounding quote to put on social media, but as a lived, raw, psychological revolution. Because once you really let that truth settle in, you start to see how much of your life is built on assumptions. How many of your beliefs weren't chosen but inherited? How many of your convictions are secondhand, absorbed from friends, family, media, culture? And once you see that, you begin to feel something else, fear. Because the moment you let go of your false certainty, your ego starts to lose its grip. And it hates that. So what do most people do instead? They double down. They protect their beliefs like fragile glass. They surround themselves with people who agree with them. They block out opposing views. They mock, they attack, they retreat to echo chambers. Not because they're evil, but because they're scared. Because when your beliefs are your identity, questioning them feels like death. And Socrates saw this clearly. That's why he never told people what to believe. He asked questions, deep, uncomfortable, relentless questions. Because he knew that real wisdom doesn't come from being told the truth, it comes from discovering that you've been wrong. And that's a terrifying, liberating, humiliating, powerful experience. But most people never go through it because it requires something rare. The courage to admit you might be wrong about the very things you've based your life on. Let me ask you something that might sting. When was the last time you changed your mind about something that truly mattered? Not something trivial. I mean something foundational, your view of morality, politics, religion, love, identity. When was the last time you allowed yourself to be shattered by a deeper truth? For most of us, the answer is never. And that's not because truth doesn't exist. It's because we've built psychological defense systems to avoid it. And the more intelligent or educated we are, the more sophisticated those defenses become. We use logic not to seek truth, but to protect ourselves from it. We use knowledge as armor against wisdom. And that's what Socrates warned us about. That the greatest obstacle to understanding is not ignorance, it's the illusion of understanding. And that illusion is everywhere. It's the expert who's forgotten how to ask questions. It's the activist who's lost empathy. It's the religious zealot who no longer listens. It's the skeptic who's closed off to wonder. It's me. It's you. So what do we do about it? How do we escape this trap without falling into the arrogance of thinking we're the ones who get it? Socrates gave us a clue. He said that wisdom isn't about having answers, it's about having the right relationship with not knowing. It's about holding your beliefs loosely, examining your thoughts as if they don't belong to you, being willing to look foolish, to be wrong, to be changed. That's not weakness, that's strength. That's what makes someone truly dangerous in the best way possible, not because they impose their ideas on others, but because they challenge the very foundation of how we think. And that's what we need now more than ever. Not more certainty, not more slogans, but more people willing to say, I don't know. Let's find out, together. How the illusion of knowledge destroys wisdom, the Socratic warning no one listens to. If there's one thing Socrates feared more than ignorance, it was the illusion of knowledge. Not because it was a flaw in the human mind, but because it was a flaw we refuse to admit. To Socrates, illusion of knowing, believing we understand something when we don't, isn't just a mistake. It's a form of delusion, a mental virus that makes us immune to learning. And that immunity is what makes it so lethal. You can't teach someone who believes they already know. And you can't wake someone who's convinced they're already awake. In our time, we see this everywhere. People proudly speak on topics they've never studied. They quote headlines as if they were sacred texts. They mistake opinions for insight, confidence for competence, and worst of all, passion for truth. And the more certain they are, the less they question themselves. The less they question, the more dangerous they become, not because they're bad people, but because they've become closed systems. No new information gets in. No transformation can happen. That's why the illusion of knowledge is more corrosive than ignorance. Pure ignorance can be humble. It can be curious. A child is ignorant, but open, teachable. But the adult who has layered their ignorance with a thick shell of ego, ideology, and pride, that's a fortress. And inside that fortress, wisdom dies. Socrates knew this. That's why he spent his life not giving answers, but asking questions. He knew that truth isn't something you deliver, it's something you draw out of people by helping them confront the limits of their understanding. The Socratic Method wasn't just a technique, it was a spiritual discipline. a way of dismantling arrogance, layer by layer, until what's left is an open mind, a mind that knows it doesn't know. And in that space, wisdom can finally grow. But the problem is, our culture doesn't reward that kind of humility. It rewards certainty, boldness, hot takes, the loudest voice in the room, the person who says, "I know exactly what's wrong with the world and how to fix it." Our social media algorithms feed us confidence, not truth. Our politics are built on the weaponization of certainty. And our education systems, despite their best intentions, often prioritize memorization over inquiry. We're taught what to think, not how to think. And so we graduate with degrees, job titles, and opinions, but very few of us have ever deeply examined the assumptions that guide our lives. Socrates say we're not educated, we're just well rehearsed. And in that rehearsal, we've lost the most essential question a human being can ask: what if I'm wrong? Let's pause here and really sit with that. When was the last time you looked at a belief you hold, maybe even one you feel proud of, and asked yourself, what if this is totally false? Not as an intellectual exercise, but as a genuine act of self-inquiry. What if your view of success is based on someone else's definition? What if your politics are shaped more by tribal loyalty than critical thought? What if the story you tell yourself about who you are is just that, a story? These aren't comfortable questions. They're dangerous. They destabilize the ego. They shake the foundation. But that's exactly the point. Because what we call growth, real, irreversible growth, doesn't happen through comfort. It happens through disruption, through the humbling realization that we've been asleep, and the courage to wake up. And here's the twist. The people who are most convinced they're awake are often the most deeply asleep, because they've replaced discovery with dogma. They've traded wonder for ideology. They've mistaken their lens for the landscape. And that's a form of blindness that's almost impossible to cure because it feels like vision. That's what Socrates meant when he said the unexamined life is not worth living. He wasn't being dramatic. He was being precise. A life built on unexamined beliefs, unchallenged assumptions, and unearned certainty is not a life, it's a performance, a script, a dream. And the worst part is, we don't even know we're dreaming. We think we're awake. We think we're wise. We think we're good. And in that conviction, we become dangerous, not just to others, but to ourselves. So what's the alternative? Socrates would tell us it's not about becoming right. It's about becoming real. It's about cultivating a kind of inner honesty that's so raw, so relentless, that it burns through every false certainty we've built. It's about making ignorance a friend, not in the sense of embracing stupidity, but in the sense of revering mystery, or recognizing that the universe is vast, that truth is complex, and that our little minds are barely scratching the surface. And in that recognition, we become wise not because we have answers, but because we've stopped pretending we do. And now I'll ask you the question that Socrates might ask if he were sitting with you now. What belief do you cling to most tightly? And if it turned out to be false, who would you be without it? That's not just a question. That's a doorway. And the moment you step through it, the illusion begins to crumble. And behind it, waiting patiently, is the wisdom that's been trying to reach you all along. When pride replaces thought, how ignorance becomes a moral weapon. One of the most disturbing transformations of ignorance is when it evolves into moral superiority. This is when ignorance stops being passive and becomes active, when it stops being a lack of awareness and becomes a tool of righteousness. It's what happens when pride replaces thought. When individuals stop questioning their beliefs because they've fused them with their sense of virtue. And once that fusion occurs, something terrifying happens. Ideas are no longer up for debate, they're sacred. And anyone who questions them isn't just wrong, they're evil. This is how ignorance becomes a moral weapon. It doesn't just mislead people, it empowers them to condemn, to shame, to dehumanize others while believing they're doing it in the name of justice, love, or truth. Socrates saw this mechanism unfolding in Athens long before it became the story of every generation. Because once people believe that their ignorance is morally righteous, they stop thinking altogether. They don't need to think. They already know. And what they know feels pure, holy, untouchable. This is where the real danger begins. Because now, ignorance isn't just a private flaw, it becomes public policy. It becomes law. It becomes outrage. It becomes war. That's why Socrates was executed. Not because he was wrong, but because he made people question the moral authority of their beliefs. He disrupted the comfort of false certainty. And when people are forced to confront the possibility that their deeply held convictions might be rooted in ignorance, they often respond with rage, not reason, because the ego is wired for survival. When you challenge someone's beliefs, you're not just challenging ideas, you're threatening their identity. You're threatening their tribe. And most people would rather destroy the questioner than examine the question. Let's take a brutally honest look at how this plays out in modern life. Think of the last heated argument you witnessed, maybe online, maybe in real life. Was anyone actually listening? Were they trying to understand each other? Or were they just waiting for their turn to speak? Most of the time, what we call debate is just a battle of egos. Each side wrapped in moral armor, attacking not just the ideas of the other, but their humanity. And the more convinced we are of our own righteousness, the more justified we feel in our cruelty. We shame, we cancel, we mock, we humiliate, all under the banner of virtue. But what if we're wrong? What if the very act of moral condemnation, when fueled by ignorance, is itself a form of violence? What if we're not punishing evil, we're punishing complexity? What if we're not defending truth, we're defending our fear of not knowing? This is what Socrates meant when he said that true wisdom requires humility. Not the fake humility of I'm just giving my opinion, but the deep, existential humility of knowing that your perspective is limited, that truth is layered, and that you could be blind in ways you can't even see. That kind of humility doesn't make you quiet, it makes you careful. It makes you curious. It makes you slow to judge, quick to listen, and brave enough to say, I don't know. But pride doesn't allow that. Pride demands certainty. It demands applause. It demands enemies. And in that demand, it turns ignorance into a crusade. That's why Socratic Method was so radical. He didn't argue, he asked. He didn't fight, he examined. He didn't condemn, he revealed. And that made him dangerous, because it forced people to see how much of their identity was built on unexamined beliefs. So I want to ask you something dangerous. What are you willing to question, even if it costs you your pride? Because that's the real test. It's easy to be open-minded about ideas that don't threaten your ego. But can you examine the beliefs that give you power, status, belonging? Can you question the narratives that make you feel morally superior? Can you consider the possibility that you've been wrong, not just intellectually, but morally? That's the edge most people won't walk. Because it's not just an intellectual risk, it's a social and emotional one. It means losing face, losing certainty, losing the comforting illusion that you're one of the good ones. But behind that loss is something priceless: integrity. The kind of integrity that can't be bought, taught, or faked. The kind that Socrates lived and died for. We live in a world that confuses confidence with clarity, that worships boldness and punishes doubt. But real wisdom is the opposite. Real wisdom is quiet. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to win. It listens more than it speaks. It asks more than it answers. And it knows that the moment you believe you've arrived at truth, you've stopped moving toward it. That's the lesson Socrates tried to teach us, not because he had all the answers, but because he never stopped asking the questions. And the most dangerous thing you can do in a world ruled by prideful ignorance is follow his example. The final blow why questioning yourself is the most rebellious act in the modern age. There's a strange kind of rebellion no one talks about anymore. It doesn't involve protests or slogans or breaking rules. It's quieter, slower, more dangerous. It's the rebellion of questioning yourself, not just your opinions, but your identity, your worldview, the story you've built around what life is, who you are, and what matters. In a world obsessed with being seen, with being heard, with being right, questioning yourself is an act of radical defiance. And yet, that's exactly what Socrates demanded of us. Not to rebel against others, but to rebel against the false self, the one that clings to certainty, that hides behind ideology, that builds walls of belief to avoid the terrifying openness of not knowing. Because to question yourself is to step into the unknown, to walk without a map, to risk the collapse of everything you've used to define your place in the world. And that collapse, if you let it happen, is where wisdom begins. But let's be honest, most people don't want wisdom. They want comfort. They want validation. They want to be told that their side is the right side, that their tribe is the good one, that their beliefs are enlightened. And so they surround themselves with mirrors, echo chambers of agreement that reflect back the image they already believe in. But mirrors don't show you the truth. They show you yourself. And if you never look beyond your reflection, you'll never see the world as it is. You'll only see your version of it. That's the trap of the modern world, the illusion of awareness without the substance of understanding. We read headlines and call it knowledge. We repeat slogans and call it insight. We repost what we agree with and call it activism. But behind all of it, we rarely ask the one question that could change everything. What if I'm wrong? Socrates wasn't just a philosopher, he was a mirror breaker. He walked through Athens asking questions that shattered people's illusions. And people hated him for it. Not because he was cruel, but because he was honest. Too honest. Because once someone shows you that your beliefs are built on sand, you either rebuild on rock or you silence them. And Athens chose the latter. They poisoned the man who exposed their ignorance. But what they couldn't kill was the idea behind him, that the most powerful thing you can do is dismantle your own certainty. Not to become passive, not to live in doubt forever, but to make space for truth, for growth, for reality. Because the mind that never questions itself is a mind that never evolves. It just hardens. So what does it mean to question yourself in real life? It means doing the one thing almost no one is willing to do. It means sitting with discomfort, with contradiction, with ambiguity. It means reading things you disagree with, not to refute them, but to understand them. It means asking yourself why you believe what you believe, who taught it to you, what it gives you, and what it's protecting you from. It means noticing when you get defensive and asking, what am I afraid of losing if I'm wrong? It means looking at your own history of ideas and seeing not a straight line of progress, but a winding path of mistakes, transformations, and blind spots. That's not weakness. That's maturity. That's courage. That's what Socrates meant when he said the unexamined life is not worth living. Not because it's bad, but because it's not real. It's a copy, a simulation, a story told by someone who's never met the author. And here's the craziest part. Once you start questioning yourself not in a shallow, performative way, but in a deep, relentless way, your life changes. You become less reactive, less tribal, less certain, but more alive, more present, more awake. You start noticing the complexity in things. You stop needing to win arguments. You start caring more about understanding than being understood. And in that shift, you become something rare, a person who thinks. Not just someone who has thoughts, but someone who thinks them through. Someone who doesn't just adopt ideas, but interrogates them. Someone who doesn't just consume information, but metabolizes it. And that's what makes you dangerous, not because you impose your beliefs on others, but because you refuse to be owned by them. So let me leave you with one final challenge, a question that Socrates might whisper into your ear today. What is the one belief you are most afraid to examine? Not because it's wrong, but because it's yours. Because it's tied to your identity, your community, your sense of self. And if you pulled on that thread, what else might unravel? What are you protecting? What are you avoiding? And what might be waiting for you on the other side of that unraveling? That's the rebellion. Not against others, but against your own illusions. That's the revolution Socrates started. Not one of weapons or protests, but of questions, of radical self-honesty, of intellectual integrity. And if you take up that rebellion, even just a little, you'll discover something most people never taste, the freedom that comes from not needing to be right. The peace that comes from no longer fearing the truth. The power that comes from knowing you still have so much to learn. That's not just philosophy, that's life. That's what makes ignorance dangerous. And that's what makes questioning yourself the most heroic act of all.